The room was old, but it was watching. For more than a century, the Senate Judiciary Committee chamber had seen everything: senators rise, presidents fall, lies spun like silk, truth buried like bones. But on this day, the room itself seemed to hold its breath. The polished mahogany table stretched like a runway of judgment. The American flag stood tall and still in the corner, unmoving, as if even it was waiting to see which side it should be on. The lighting was cold, clinical, not theatrical, not soft. It was the kind of light used in operating rooms or interrogation cells. Cameras blinked silently. Lenses rotated slightly, trying to catch every twitch of the face, every tremble of the hand. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Pens tapped nervously. Aides shuffled paper just to feel busy. But all of it was background noise for what was really happening. At the heart of it all sat Ivanka Trump, perfectly styled, impeccably dressed, her expression composed, unreadable. She looked like she had prepared for war, but the wrong kind. Directly across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, wearing a navy blue suit, no designer label, no theatrics, just fierce earned authority. Between them on the table lay a simple manila envelope, no gold seal, no logo, no fanfare. But it may as well have been a ticking time bomb. Two women, one truth, in one room that had watched history unfold and was about to witness it shatter. For everyone else in the room, this was just another hearing. For Jasmine, it was the moment she had built her career for. For Ivanka, it was the moment that could end everything she thought she knew about herself. In the room, this ancient echo-filled chamber was about to become the courtroom for a trial no one saw coming. She didn't walk into that hearing room with entitlement. She walked in with evidence. Jasmine Crockett was not born into legacy. She didn't inherit a fortune. She didn't carry a famous last name. She carried case files, worn-down heels, and the quiet rage of a woman who had spent her whole life being underestimated. Before the marble walls, before the flashing cameras, before the envelope. She was just another public defender in Texas, working late nights, fighting for people who had no voice, trying to explain justice to mothers who had lost children, to fathers falsely accused, to teenagers told by a system you don't matter. She had no bodyguards, no donors, no family dynasty to lean on. What she had was her mind, her grit, and a belief that if you dig deep enough, truth leaves a trail. That belief had carried her through courtrooms where the odds were stacked, through council meetings where her voice was ignored, through neighborhoods where injustice didn't make the news because no one bothered to report it. But Jasmine, she noticed. She read every footnote. She asked every uncomfortable question. She learned that power only fears two things: facts and a woman who won't back down. By the time she made it to Congress, they called her a firebrand. But she wasn't here to be loud. She was here to be precise, to look the powerful in the eye and say, "Show me the receipts." And today she had them. She wasn't in that hearing to perform. She was there to reveal. The woman in the navy blue suit didn't represent celebrity. She represented accountability. And in a room full of status silence and stage smiles, she had brought the one thing no one expected: proof. It sat there, silent, ordinary, a simple manila envelope like the kind you'd find in a school filing cabinet or a lawyer's briefcase. But this one, it pulsed with weight. It buzzed without sound, like it knew it contained something that didn't just matter, it threatened to redefine everything. It didn't wear its importance on the outside. No warning labels, no red tape, no classified stamps. But those who watched closely could feel it. This envelope didn't belong to the moment. It belonged to the past, to 30 years of silence, 30 years of carefully constructed myth, 30 years of power built on one name, Trump, in a story no one ever dared to challenge. And now it was here, on a table, in a Senate hearing, under fluorescent lights, between a woman who was raised by power and another who was raised by truth. Jasmine Crockett never once looked at the envelope during the opening minutes of the hearing, but her hand rested near it, almost like she could feel the storm sealed inside. And when Ivanka answered that now famous question, "Donald Trump is my father," her voice clear, proud, confident. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She simply tapped the envelope once softly. And in that single gesture, the entire room changed. Because it was in that moment everyone realized, what if this envelope didn't just hold paper, but a secret buried for 30 years? She didn't grow into power, and she was shaped for it. Molded, polished, trained. From the moment Ivanka Trump could walk in heels, she was walking toward a throne. Not a literal one, but a throne made of press coverage, brand deals, and photo ops. Her life was curated like a luxury product line. Every smile, every speech, every step. She wasn't just born into wealth. She was engineered for legacy. Ivanka wasn't the loud one in the Trump empire. She was the elegant one. The refined contrast to her father's chaos. The silent weapon in a family that often shouted their power. When she appeared on the television, she didn't rant. She smiled. She nodded. She used words like empowerment, balance, and vision. But behind that charm was calculation. Every internship she got, every board she sat on, every invitation to elite events came with one invisible stamp: Trump's daughter. And it worked. Doors opened, deals flowed. Her name opened rooms her or some couldn't. To many, Ivanka represented the modern American success story. But the truth was darker. She was successfully trained to perform as success. Scripted elegance, polished privilege. A legacy wrapped in silk, but stitched together by someone else's power. She was taught how to win, but never had to learn how to fight. Until now, because this time her last name wouldn't be enough. Ivanka wasn't just part of the Trump brand, she was the brand. In glossy magazines, she was the calm face behind the chaos. On real estate brochures, she stood beside marble staircases and golden chandeliers, smiling like she had built it all herself. In political campaigns, she was the humanizing element, the daughter who made Donald seem just a little more relatable. But the truth, Ivanka Trump was not a builder. She was a product. She didn't lay bricks. She didn't negotiate with steel companies. She posed. She smiled. She spoke softly while her father shouted. And behind that gentle delivery was an empire of inherited influence. She sat on boards of Trump properties, held executive titles in organizations she didn't create. She gave keynote speeches at global forums, not because of what she had accomplished, but because of who she called dad. The Trump name opened doors in real estate, then media, then politics, and Ivanka walked through each one with the grace of someone who didn't have to knock. She wasn't questioned because to question her was to question him. And for years in rooms of power, that was unthinkable. But here's the danger when your image is built on someone else's name. If that name ever cracks, so do you. And on this day, in this room with one envelope, Ivanka was about to find out what happens when your entire public identity rests on blood that may not be yours. Ivanka Trump sat with the poise of a woman who had never been cornered. Her cream-colored blazer hugged her shoulders just right. Not too sharp, not too soft. It set him powerful but approachable. Her fingers rested gently on the table, not clenched, not nervous. They didn't twitch, they didn't sweat, they simply waited. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She didn't smirk. She didn't threaten. She just watched like a surgeon watching the monitor before the first incision. The distance between them was no more than 6 feet, but emotionally, it could have been 1,000 miles. Ivanka looked calm. She looked in control. She didn't know that the floor beneath her was already cracking. She believed this was just another hearing, another routine set of questions. Another day where the Trump name would shield her like it always had. She had faced tough interviews. She had danced through scandals. She had survived political heat before. And to the cameras, she looked unshaken, composed, ready. But what she didn't realize was that Jasmine hadn't come to perform. She had come to reveal. And somewhere beneath Ivanka's flawless appearance, beneath the rehearsed posture and the polished smile, there was something fragile, something untested. Because for the first time in her life, the battlefield wasn't scripted and the enemy wasn't press. It was paperwork, cold, silent, undeniable. And it was already sitting just inches from her hand. It started like any other question, simple, straightforward, almost forgettable. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her tone calm. Her voice didn't rise, her expression didn't change. She looked Ivanka straight in the eye and asked Ms. Trump, can you describe the nature of your biological relationship with Mr. Donald Trump? Just that. No accusation, no drama, just a question. The kind of question that gets overlooked in most hearings, filed under routine background or legal formality. But the silence that followed was not routine. Ivanka blinked just once, then smiled, poised, controlled. Donald Trump is my father, she replied. I've been proud to work alongside him and learn from his experience throughout my life. It was the kind of answer she had given 100 times before, the same rhythm, the same practiced warmth, the same subtle nod to legacy. But something in the room shifted. It wasn't in her words, it was in Jasmine's silence. Because when someone knows the answer is about to collapse, they don't need to challenge it. They just let it hang there. Let it echo. Let the weight of what's coming do the work. And so Jasmine sat back, hands folded, calm, measured. But behind her stillness was a blade. Sharp, legal, undeniable. And with that one question, one line tucked between pages of legal inquiry, the entire chamber knew. This isn't going to be just another hearing. Something is about to break. She didn't slam it down. She didn't wave it in the air. Jasmine Crockett simply unfolded a single sheet of paper, aged yellowed at the corners, but sharp where it mattered. Let the record reflect, she said softly, this document is a corporate insurance filing from 1987. A pause, not for drama, but to let the numbers speak first. To the average person, it looked like nothing. Rows, codes, insurance jargon. But to trained eyes, this was a red flag in plain text. The policyholder, Trump Enterprises. The dependents, Ivanka Trump, age 6. But the claim, genetic testing processed through a private contractor in Maryland specialized in paternity verification. That alone might seem strange. But Jasmine had more. She pointed to a line code 443A, filed under verification of parental identity extended. That term doesn't appear in routine family coverage. It appears in legal disputes, in inheritance challenges, in custody conflicts. Ivanka didn't flinch, but her fingers moved slightly. Jasmine continued, this isn't a test for illness, she explained, this is a test for origin. And then the room started shifting. Senators looked down at their copies. Whispers spread. Reporters typed faster. Because for the first time, the what if felt real. And this was only the beginning. Just one sheet of paper. One breadcrumb on a trail that had been buried for decades. But now it was being followed. Step by step, word by word, towards something no one was ready to see. At first glance, Ivanka still looked composed. Her posture remained upright. Her lips curved in that same faint practiced smile. But the camera always sees more than the room. A blink, half a second too long. A glance downward, not at the speaker, but at the edge of the table. The fingers that had once rested calmly now straightened a paper that didn't need straightening. Adjusted a pen that hadn't moved. Shifted a folder that was already perfectly aligned. It was subtle, but not to those who understood body language, not to those trained to watch the unraveling. Jasmine didn't press, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't even change expression. But her silence, it was surgical. And Ivanka, the woman raised under spotlight, sculpted for press photos, drilled for debates, was beginning to feel the weight of unscripted air. A slight clench in her jaw, a quiet exhale, a glance not at Jasmine, but at the exit door. Senator Booker leaned forward. The room seemed to lean with him. Everyone smelled it. Control was slipping, and the woman who had built her life on image and poise was beginning to crack. Not in screams, not in breakdowns, but in tiny, unspoken tremors that said more than any outburst ever could. It wasn't just old insurance forms anymore. Now it was a government-stamped medical record dated July 14, 1997. Jasmine Crockett lifted the second envelope slowly, then slid out a folder marked Occugene Labs Federal Clearance Audit File. The courtroom quieted. This report was part of a background verification she explained during an early vetting for a federal contract under Trump Industries. And then she turned the first page. Inside a genetic comparison chart, 2 samples, one labeled D. Trump, the other II Trump, a string of gene markers, all coded, some matched, some didn't. One column was highlighted. A handwritten note circled the result. Mismatch observed in loci D5S818, D13S317, D18S51, recommend further testing. Jasmine paused. For those unfamiliar, she said these markers are core identifiers in parent-child relationships. A mismatch in even 2 can raise serious flags. This document reports 3. The air in the room shifted again. Even the most skeptical faces looked up. Jasmine flipped to the final page, a summary from the lab conclusion, inconclusive match. Paternal relation not statistically confirmed, and that's when Ivanka finally moved. Her chair creaked, her hand pressed tightly against the table. Her jaw clenched, this time no longer subtle, because the room didn't just hear the numbers. They felt the crack, not just in her story, but in the foundation of everything she had been sold as. And Jasmine, she didn't smile, didn't blink. She just let the silence speak, When Jasmine slid the next document onto the table, the air in the Senate room grew heavy, not louder, but heavier. She didn't need to explain it. The heading said enough: Fred Cedar Trump Jr., confidential medical disposition, 1996. A murmur rippled through the room. Fred Trump Jr., the forgotten son, the one who drank himself to death, the one the Trump family rarely spoke of, the one whose shadow never made it into campaign speeches but never left the family estate. Jasmine's voice cut through the silence. The records show that in 1996, shortly before his passing, Fred Trump Jr. submitted a full genetic profile for medical treatment at New Hope Clinic in Queens. These records were cross-referenced with the 1997 audit we presented earlier. Another pause. The match between Fred Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump is statistically stronger than the match with Donald Trump. The room didn't move, not a blink, not a cough. Because what Jasmine was implying was not just scandal, it was lineage. Ivanka's father may not have been the man whose name she built her empire on, but his brother, a man the family had erased, buried not only in ground but in memory. This wasn't just biology, it was betrayal, of identity, of inheritance, of the very image the Trump dynasty projected for decades. And in that silence, there was something else. Guilt. Not just Ivanka's, but the whole family's. Because this secret wasn't buried by accident. It was buried with money, with lawyers, with NDAs, with entire newsrooms told to drop the story. Jasmine didn't need to accuse anyone. The ghost was already in the room, and Fred Trump Jr., the broken son, once pushed aside as a failure, had just rewritten the family tree. There was no shouting, no name-calling, no anger, just precision. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She didn't blink faster. She dissected. "Ms. Trump," she said calmly, "do you recall the settlement agreement signed on September 5, 2000 listing FCT as the restricted payee for family funds?" Ivanka blinked once. "Were you ever told that those funds were set aside due to questions about inheritance legitimacy?" No objection came. No clarification either. Jasmine continued, her tone almost surgical. "And do you believe your public image, the so-called White House princess, was built on a foundation of truth or just presentation, every word sliced cleaner than the last? No theatrics, no drama, just a woman holding a scalpel of facts and cutting through decades of deception." The gallery sat frozen, because Jasmine wasn't fighting. She was performing surgery on a lie that had grown into a brand, a name, an empire, and with each answer, Ivanka wasn't just unraveling. She was bleeding credibility. It wasn't dramatic. No one screamed, no chair was flipped, but everyone watching felt it. Ivanka Trump sat motionless, but her fingers trembled. Just slightly enough for the camera to catch. Enough for the internet to slow it down, zoom in, and dissect. Her perfectly drawn eyeliner didn't smudge. Her hair stayed in place. But her eyes, they broke. Not with tears, not with rage, but with something worse. Disorientation. She blinked. Once, twice. She looked not at Jasmine, not at the committee, but straight ahead as if searching for something that wasn't there anymore. The cameras, dozens of them, caught everything. Not just her face, but every micro-expression, the lip twitch, the jaw lock, the breath hitch. To the untrained eye, she was just listening. But to America, Ivanka Trump was unraveling. In real time, in HD, in front of millions. The White House princess, the polished brand, the Trump heir. Now just a woman lost in a truth she had never prepared for. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just leaned back in her chair, looked at Ivanka, no anger, no pity, and spoke one final sentence. "Your real inheritance isn't the Trump name. It's from the man who died too young." The room froze. Again. Because in that one line, she didn't just challenge Ivanka's legacy, she redefined it. Fred Trump Jr., the brother cast aside. The one buried beneath silence. And now he was rising not in body, but through truth. What Jasmine meant was clear. Ivanka didn't inherit real estate fame or political dynasty. She inherited the cover-up, the silence, the shame, the lie. This wasn't about blood anymore. This was about what we pass on when we erase people from the story. The cameras kept rolling, but for the first time since the hearing began, no one moved. Not a pen, not a phone. Because Jasmine's final line had done what no scandal, no tweet, no headline ever could. It made America question what inheritance truly means. Within seconds of Jasmine's final words, hashtags began flooding the timeline. Shaj, real Trump daughter. Shad, Fred, Joja truth. Shaj, stolen identity. Shaj, Ivanka mass trending. Everywhere. Not just Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, cable news. Facebook feeds of grandmothers in Florida. The world wasn't just talking about Ivanka. They were talking about identity. Influencers posted emotional videos, their voices shaking. I always thought inheritance was about money. But what if it's about the lies we carry? Former Trump supporters, even some, began to hesitate. If this is true, what else did they hide from us? Memes exploded. Some mocking, some grieving. One viral tweet simply read, "She inherited the silence, not the throne." But what struck hardest wasn't the scandal. It was the raw ache of a woman whose entire life may have been scripted by people who never told her the truth. Suddenly, this wasn't just about politics, or Trump, or Jasmine. This was about all of us who ever questioned, was I really told the truth about who I am? The truth had cracked the image. Now it threatened to crack the system. Within 24 hours, legal scholars flooded the airwaves. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all asking one question. If Ivanka's identity is legally misrepresented, what happens to everything she signed, approved, inherited, or oversaw? One Georgetown constitutional law professor put it bluntly, you cannot inherit the powers of a name if that name was never truly yours. Former DOJ officials questioned, was Ivanka eligible to serve as an advisor in the White House? Were their contracts domestic or international signed under false familial pretense? Could foreign diplomats sue based on misrepresentation? Would financial trusts be voided? Healthcare experts chimed in too. If Jasmine's documents are accurate, then federal vetting systems failed and someone bypassed medical genetic protocols. And finally, the most terrifying question echoed across podcasts and primetime. Could Ivanka Trump be forced to return what was never legally hers? The words fraud, disqualification, and even perjury were floated. No one had answers, but everyone had fear. Not just for Ivanka, but for what it would mean if the foundation of power could be undone by a blood test. She had been trained for pressure, raised on camera, taught to smile even when the world screamed. But nothing prepares you for this, the collapse of self. In the days following the hearing, Ivanka went silent. No tweets, no statements, no photos of her kids, no curated images of her life. Just nothing. Psychologists on morning shows spoke carefully but clearly. We are witnessing an identity fracture. This isn't about public shame anymore. It's about private disintegration. Because when you are told your entire life that you are a Trump and then told you're not, who are you? Does she still trust her mother, the woman who kissed her forehead but may have withheld the truth for decades? Does she trust her father if he even is her father? And perhaps the most crushing question, can Ivanka Trump even trust Ivanka? Trump, former aides, leaked reports. She questioned old photographs, her birth certificate, even memories. Was it real or was it rehearsed? This wasn't just a scandal. This was a woman grappling with erasure, not from media, but from her own history. The cameras never stopped rolling. The memes never stopped multiplying. The interviews never stopped airing. But something shifted. At first, the world laughed, mocked, analyzed her facial expressions like a national sport. But soon a different kind of silence grew. A viral video showed Ivanka leaving her Manhattan apartment, no makeup head, low, surrounded by reporters yelling, "Are you really a Trump or just a lie in heels?" The clip hit 12 million views in 6 hours. But this time the top comment read, "This isn't news, this is cruelty." Media analysts began asking, where is the line between accountability and annihilation? Ethicists debated on live panels. We have a right to the truth, yes. But do we have the right to watch someone lose everything, including her sense of self? And HD psychologists called it collective voyeurism. We aren't just watching a downfall. We're consuming it, turning a woman's private, shattering into a public entertainment loop. And in that loop, something darker emerged. Not just about Ivanka, but about us. Do we demand the truth, or do we secretly crave someone else's collapse to feel safer in our own skin? She didn't raise her voice. She didn't throw insults. She didn't need to. Jasmine Crockett stood in the same room where giants once spoke and made silence louder than the sound. What began as a hearing ended as a reckoning. Not just for Ivanka, not just for the Trumps, but for the very idea of truth in American power. Across retirement homes and veterans' halls, across Sunday church discussions, and living rooms in the Midwest, a quiet murmur grew louder. Finally, someone stood up for what's right. Older viewers, those who had seen Watergate, who had watched civil rights marches, who had buried friends in wars for democracy, felt something stir again. Crockett reminded them of what justice was supposed to look like. She wasn't after a headline. She was after restoration. She wasn't breaking a family. She was resetting the moral compass of a country. Her poise, her unshakable facts, her refusal to smear, yet refusal to yield. It wasn't performance, it was purpose. And when she closed her folder at the end of the hearing, there was no applause, just a standing silence, the kind that doesn't cheer, but remembers. She looked across the room one last time. The lights no longer felt blinding. The silence wasn't empty, it was heavy with truth. Jasmine Crockett stood not as a congresswoman, not as a lawyer, but as a daughter of history. She didn't shout, she didn't beg. She simply said, "You can inherit power, but truth must be earned." A sentence, but it struck like thunder, because in that one line she rewrote the legacy of a family and reminded a nation no bloodline can protect you from the weight of the truth. Then she turned to the cameras, not with anger, not with pride, but with something deeper challenge. "What would you do," she asked, "if the truth you were raised on turned out to be a lie? Would you deny it, or would you stand up and face it, even if it burned everything you once believed?" The question wasn't for Ivanka. It wasn't for the Senate. It was for us, for every citizen, every family, every generation living in stories that might not be real. And as Crockett walked out of the chamber, the door didn't close with a bang. It closed with a whisper, the kind that stays in your conscience forever. Truth is not inherited, it's chosen. The room is empty now. The lights are off. The headlines are already out. But you're still here, listening, feeling. Because this story was never just about Ivanka, or Trump, or Crockett. It was about you, about the truths we're told, the lies we live with, the silences we protect because it's easier than confronting the storm. So we ask you, have you ever discovered a truth that someone tried to bury a truth in your family, in your community, in your history? What did you do? Did you keep it locked away, or did you let it breathe? Because the truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can set a soul free. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing yours, you'll inspire someone else to finally open that envelope they've been too afraid to touch. Tell us in the comments, not for the likes, but for the legacy, because truth deserves witnesses. This story reminds us of a simple but timeless truth. Power can be inherited, but integrity must be chosen. No matter how strong the family name, how powerful the connections, or how carefully secrets are buried, the truth always finds its way to the surface. In our own lives, maybe we don't sit in a Senate hearing room. Maybe we don't face the cameras, but we all face choices. Choices about whether to live with silence or to speak, whether to protect a lie or stand for the truth. And the question is, when the moment comes, will you have the courage to be like Jasmine, calm, unshaken, and unafraid to speak the truth? If this story made you think, if it stirred something in your heart, don't just leave it here. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss the truth the mainstream won't tell you. Together, we're not just viewers, we're witnesses.